Can a single question change a life? A relationship, a life, a moment. 2015, a very non-traditional 47-year-old doctoral student was sitting in a hotel in Cleveland, Ohio, and a friend of mine had said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "I don't know." I think my wife said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "I don't know." But on that night, I took a piece of paper and I wrote, "Transformation. Let the journey begin." And as I walked into that classroom that first day, Dr. Richard Boyatzis, our leadership professor, soon to become my dissertation chair, was talking to us about neuroscience, leadership, and coaching, and I felt like my world had just smashed all together. And then he gave me an assignment. And the assignment was, go out and interview an executive for 1 hour and try to keep her in a positive emotional state for 60 minutes based on the questions that we asked and the dialogue that we had. Now, in our world, that's called PEA, positive emotional attractor, as compared to NEA, which is negative emotional attractor. So I got introduced to the Chief Human Resource Officer of a Fortune 100 company. Now, I want you to imagine for a second that you're me. So you walk into her office in the middle of the day, she doesn't know who you are, and you're supposed to keep her in this positive emotional framework. So I walk into her office, it's beautifully professional. She herself is sitting there very stoic in her chair, and she's looking at her computer, very task-focused at the moment. She turns towards me, and now this is where I feel a little adrenaline and cortisol start to spike. She turns towards me, she says hello, and then she says, "Let's go." And in that moment, I'm sitting there thinking, this is never gonna work. And so as that adrenaline focused and drove in me, I asked a question, and it just blurted out of me. What do you dream about? What do you dream about? And I sat quietly. And here's what she did. She turned her chair away from me, looked out the window, took a deep breath, and she said, "I don't know the last time anybody has ever asked me that." And in that moment, everything shifted. We went from two people doing an interview to two human beings in a room having a conversation of what mattered to her, not me. And what I realized in that moment was that human connection that is intentional matters. And that question, what do you dream about, actually matters. An hour later, of course, we had some of those negative emotional moments that kind of came into the dialogue, because that's life. But as we finished that 60 minutes together, she said thank you, and I walked out of the room. Left the building, got in my car, and started to cry. And here's what I realized. The tears didn't come from the fact that the interview was perfect. The tears came from the fact that I questioned myself as to why do I know more about her in 1 hour than I knew about people that I led, cared about, and sometimes even lived with for years. It was because in that moment, through the questions that I asked, I was curious, and her story actually came to life. And what I realized in that moment was that human connection matters through our ability to have relational transformation, and that is actually where this talk begins. So here's the problem. Can you imagine in our organizations that, according to research, 7 out of 10 people that walk through the door are not engaged in what they're actually doing? Meaning, they're not as dedicated as they could be. They're not as absorbed in what they're doing. They're not bringing all the energy that they actually could to that moment. Do you also know that, according to research, 50+% of marriages in this country aren't going to work? Do you also know that pervasive communication problems in our organizations are dollarized to be a $1.2 trillion issue, and multiple generations in the workforce aren't going to stay with us for very long? And so this talk is not one to be a nice to have, it's a must have, because we are in a relational crisis. And now as a professor, I get to see 18-year-olds through organizational life up to 50, 60-year-olds. And here's what we all know. Technology is moving faster than at any point in our history. Artificial intelligence is changing how we work. Social media is changing how we see each other. And my question to you is, do you see the people that you're in relationships with for who they really are? And then let's talk about the phone for just a second. That thing that's supposed to connect us oftentimes disconnects us from the people that we're supposed to be in communication with. And if you don't believe me, here's an experiment for you. The next time you're on an airplane and the plane lands, I dare you to avoid the dopamine spike that is to grab your phone in the first 5 seconds and just observe the people around you and watch them grab for their phones, as if the world stopped from the moment that we were on that plane. Oddly enough, we have tools, more technology than any point in the history of humankind, but yet we are arguably more disconnected than ever. So I introduced a very simple concept, and the concept is called the dream leader. And what I want you to think about is the definition of a dream. Think of a dream as an aspirational image of a desired future state. An aspirational image, something you can see, of a desired future state that you care about, not that somebody else cares about. And then I want you to think about leadership, as leadership is that ability to inspire others to achieve exceptional performance. And can you imagine, in this simple concept, put the concept of a dream leader and carry that into our personal relationships and carry that into our professional relationships? Because here's what I learned in my research. When we actually do that, there's this concept that draws us near. It's called a shared vision. And a shared vision through the power of a relational climate actually drives outcomes like engagement. And the fun part is, there's science to back this up. So I want to take you into a moment, just like the CHRO office, where hope enters the room, care enters the room, empathy enters the room, compassion enters the room. Here's what happens in our system. When care enters the room, your parasympathetic nervous system is actually activated. Your neurochemistry actually releases oxytocin and dopamine, where you actually build levels of trust through oxytocin and the bond that we have as human beings, which is a non-negotiable. Here's what also happens. Your heart rate comes down. Your blood pressure comes down. Your respiratory system is more under control. And when we're in relationship with one another, we actually see each other. And the outcome of that, we're more imaginative, we're more creative, we're better problem solvers. We actually lean in and build the relationships that we all strive for. So what I want you to think of today, are you a dream leader that can both dream, but also interpret the dreams of others that we serve? So I want to take you back to 2005. A friend of mine dares me to audition for a community theater production. And I'm like, there's no way I'm auditioning for a community theater show. I was a father, I was a business person, I was a worship leader. I'm like, I have no time for that. So he hands me a flyer. And on the flyer, I look at it, I stick it in my backpack, I carry it with me to work, and I call the director that day, and I say, I'm this guy that kind of might be interested in your show. What do I got to do? A dream fulfilled, actually, because it drove my love for theater and music and story. So I go to the audition, I'm sitting there, I do what I'm supposed to do, and shockingly, I get called back. And I get called back for the lead role. So I'm standing up there on the stage for the lead role, and I have the amazing privilege of stepping into the story of Joseph. Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And playing that role turned out to mean so much more to me than a part, because Joseph is one of those people in history that is one of the biggest dreamers and dream interpreters, but not from the mountaintops, but also from the valleys. And I would teach about Joseph, I would play Joseph. Now let me be perfectly clear, I am no Donny Osmond. Donny Osmond played Joseph over 2,000 times. I only got to play Joseph 40 times in 2 different productions. But here's what I realized, and I want you to come with me for a second. There's a part in the show, forget the part where he's in the palace, let's talk about where he's in the prison. And I remember holding on to the bars in the prison, and the light is coming down at me this way, and in walks next to me the character of the butler. And here's what Joseph does, and my question for us as a dream leader. Do we see those that are in front of us even when we're in the valleys, not just the mountaintops? And so Joseph takes a moment, he looks over at the butler, and he sees him first, sees his face, chooses to interpret his dream. And here's what happens. You remove that one brushstroke from that story, and the butler never gets to Pharaoh. Pharaoh never finds out about Joseph. Joseph never gets to the palace. So what's the point? The point is, are we willing to be dream interpreters, even when we're in our lowest moments, when we're in the valleys of where we live? And do we see another for who they are, or do we see them for what we want them to be? And it was in that moment, in that story, in 2005, that I didn't realize at the moment was the beginning and the shaping of this simple concept called a dream leader. Fast forwarding to 2015, as I stand here today on this amazing anniversary of our country, 250 years later, that took a group of people that put language to a dream. And my question to you today is, can you put language to a dream? Are you a dreamer, and are you a dream interpreter? So as you start to think about this concept as you go, I was recently in New York City, and I had the chance to see an off-Broadway show called Labelless. Stories of young people and their journeys. And you get to the very end of the show, and one of the gentlemen on the stage, he looks out, just as I'm looking at you, and he says, "I see you." And he looks around the audience, he says, "I see you." And my question is, can you see others for who they dream to be? Because I see you. And the question is, do you see me? So as a reflection, my challenge to you, when you ask someone that question, what do you dream about? Ask it, wait, and listen. And my hope is that you not only dream big, but you dream often, and that you become truly a dream leader. Thank you.